Hey, fourth graders, welcome back to math. Today we're going to be looking at comparing decimals greater than, less than, or equal to when we compare two different decimal amounts. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about some money. Now I know, yes, this is a dollar bill here. The way that we write a dollar bill is by writing a 1 in our ones place. Then we have our decimal. And then we have zero change here. We have 0 cents, no dimes, nickels, quarters, or pennies, because we just have $1 here, 1.00. Now I know that if I go from a dollar bill here to a penny equals 1 cent, right? And I also know that there are 100 pennies that make up a $1 bill. Now I remember saying 100 pennies make $1 bill. If we look here at my $1 bill, 1.00, if you take that decimal out, that does look like 100, the number 100, right? So if I have 1 penny, I would have only 1 out of this 100 here. I'm going to leave that there, actually. A penny here would only represent 1/100th, right? I did have my $1 bill here, my 1 ones, 0 tenths, and 0 hundredths, but now when I have my penny, I have 0 tenths and 1/100th, right? Because if I have 100 of these, that does equal $1. Moving from a penny now to a nickel, I know that a nickel equals 5 cents. 5 pennies equals a nickel. Therefore, I just want to change my 1, which my penny was, my 1/100th, to 5/100ths. Now, going on from a nickel to a dime now, I know that a dime equals 10 cents. And I know that that is twice the amount of my nickel there. Also, if I have 10 pennies, that does equal 1 dime. So if I have 10 hundredths, it would look like this. 10 hundredths does also equal 1/10. Remember, we can read it as either 1/10, or we can also read it as 10 hundredths. And again, that was my dime. And my last coin that I'm going to show you guys here is my quarter, right? And I know that a quarter is 25 cents. So if I want to get these out of here a second, I know that a quarter is 25 cents. So I'm going to need 2 groups of tenths to get my 20 out of my 25 cents here. And I need 5 hundredths yet to make my 25 cents. That's my quarter, all right? Now, when we're comparing decimals here, we can think of it in a couple different ways, and one of those ways is with money, right? So if I'm going to take these down here a second. If I look at these 3 problems here, I'm going to take a look at this top one up here. If I have 1/100th and 1/10th, and I ask myself which one is greater, is 1/100th bigger than 1/10th, or is 1/10th bigger than 100? Well, or excuse me, 1/100th. Well, we could either look at it one of 2 ways. The first way that we're going to look at it is with money. Now, I know that 1/100th represents a penny. If I have 0.01, that represented my penny, right? And I know that a dime is more than a penny. I know that a dime was where we just had, I'll put this 0 up here. Up here is my 0.01, that represents my penny. Down here is my 0.10, my 1/10th, that represents my dime. Now I know that a dime is greater than a penny because it has more value in money, right? 10 cents is more than 1 cent. In which case, I know that 0.1 is going to be greater than 0.01, so I'm going to add that here. I know that 0.1 is greater than 0.01. 1/10th is greater than 1/100th. All right. Another way that we can look at this is by comparing place values. Let's look at this second problem here, right? I have 25 hundredths and I have 27 hundredths. The way that I do this is I'm going to always first look at my tenths place value, the number right next to the decimal, all right? So let's take a look at right here for this example here. What number is in my place value of my tenths? Well, that would be a 2. Underline my 2 here. So if I look over here, I also notice that I also have a 2 in my tenths place value. If this one was a 3, I would know that this decimal would be greater than this decimal over here, because 3/10 is already bigger than 2/10. But since we just have 2/10 and 2/10, now I need to go from looking at my tenths place value over to my hundredths place value. Whichever decimal has the more amount of hundredths is going to be the bigger decimal. All right, so if I have my 5 here in my hundredths compared to the 7 here in for this decimal's hundredths, I know that 7 hundredths is more than 5 hundredths, right? This would be kind of like 25 cents compared to 27 cents. And because of that, I am going to say that 0.25 25 hundredths is less than 27 hundredths. All right? And our last one down here is 43 hundredths compared to 58 hundredths. Right? Let's look at this one with both of our strategies here. First, with the place value. I know that my tenths place value here is a 4. And my tenths place value over here is a 5. Now, we don't even need to look at the hundredths place value because I know that 5 tenths is greater than 4 tenths, in which case 58 hundredths is got to be greater than 43 hundredths. Even if this this hundredths place value was more than that hundredths place value, we only need to compare the tenths and figure that out unless if our tenths are equal, like we had up here. All right, so I could also look at this in terms of money. If I have 0.43 43 hundredths, if I remember correctly, every hundredth is kind of like a penny or a cent, right? So this is like saying I have 43 cents. Over here, it's kind of like saying I have 58 cents. Well, of course, I would want to take 58 cents over 43 cents. So I definitely want to say that 58 hundredths is greater than 43 hundredths. All right. So some of you may know this, some of you may not. But Mr. Rush has been actually helping coach the virtual boys running club. Yes, it is virtual because we're not at school anymore. So we've been kind of practicing on our own and training. And I know Rebecca Borman in our class is doing that as well. You guys are welcome to join if you would like. The 5K is actually on my wedding day, so I'll be running a 5K the morning of my wedding, which will be kind of exciting. But my fiance, Miss Rebecca, has been helping me train a little bit. And I've been logging how long we've been able to run before we need a drink of water, all right? It's been different for Miss Rebecca and for myself. I know that every time we run, and then every time we stop for a drink of water, I stop and I log how far we ran before we needed a drink of water. And it's been different, again, like I said, for Miss Rebecca than for myself. So right here, this is the first time I logged. The first time we ran, Miss Rebecca ran 4 tenths of our distance before she needed a drink of water. Meanwhile, Mr. Rush only ran 2 tenths of our distance before he needed a drink of water. And I needed help logging this, right? I wanted to take my 4 tenths and write that in decimal form here. If I remember correctly, 4 tenths, I need to look up here a second. 4 tenths, how do I write that again? Well, I see my decimal here, I see my tenths here. 4 tenths, 0.4, right? So I'm going to put a 0.4 there for Miss Rebecca. Meanwhile, for myself, I only ran 2 tenths of our distance before I needed a drink of water. So that for me would be 0.2, all right? But the second time I logged our distance tracking here, I got a little bit better. Not quite as good as Miss Rebecca, but a little bit better, right? So if we look right here, Miss Rebecca ran for 52 hundredths of our distance before she needed a drink of water. Meanwhile, I ran for 5 tenths of our distance before I needed a drink of water. I know that Miss Rebecca ran 52 hundredths, which does look like this. 52 hundredths, 0.52. So I'm going to write that down right here. 0.52. Meanwhile, Mr. Rush did only run for 5 tenths, which again is 0.5. Looks like Mr. Rush needs to get outside right now and do some more training if I need to surpass Miss Rebecca here, all right? So while I do that, you guys can go work on some math problems. Check out Google Classroom to see what problems and pages you will need to be working on. But in the meantime, I'll see you guys later, and remember to wash your hands.